Why am I an anti-natalist? Well, I really don't think it's that complicated. I just see that bringing sentient beings into existence without their consent is a bad thing, and I think we should stop it. Now, there are a lot of arguments against the consent argument, and one of the biggest ones I've heard is that, well, you can't get consent, but from the unborn to bring them into existence. But I think if you can't get consent to do something to someone by that person, then the default should be not to do anything to them. So I guess I could just end this video right now. I've explained pretty clearly, why I'm an anti-natalist. The argument's convincing and it's clear. You don't do any harm to something if you don't bring it into existence. The harms start after you've made the decision to bring it into existence. And if you bring something sentient into existence, then how exactly do you reply to them when they say, I wish you hadn't done that? You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have brought me into existence. I mean, all the harms visited upon that thing you brought into existence are your fault for bringing it into existence. You never should have. So that's anti-natalism to me in a nutshell, and that's why I'm an anti-natalist. Now, there are many other arguments, and a lot of the other arguments are excellent arguments. There are some real bad arguments, but I think it's the right position, anti-natalism. I mean, another bigger question could be, why isn't everyone else an anti-natalist? Why don't they find the argument convincing? And for this, I'd have to say, you just can't overstate how stupid people are. And this is not necessarily meant to be insulting. It is insulting, and it's true. Human beings, including myself, are incredibly stupid. We're good at a few types of things. Music, some art, language perhaps. But we're really, really shitty at philosophy. We're really shitty at thinking critically about our own societies. We're really shitty about introspection. And not just introspection into ourselves, but introspection into our society. And we're willfully stupid, and we're incredibly good at being willfully stupid. Whether that's as an evolutionary protection mechanism for ourselves, or what exactly that is, I don't know, but I think we're just, our ability to be willfully ignorant is just incredible. There's a writer, Upton Sinclair, who once said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his job depends on not understanding it." Well, you see this across the board, right? Oil executives, people in the natural gas, coal industry. None of them will ever understand. Well, that's too broadly stated. Most of them won't understand and choose not to understand global warming, because their job, their whole industry depends on fossil fuels, right, which are contributing to global warming. And there are many other reasons that people choose not to understand really basic stuff. The power of the culture and the power of the tribe mentality is so powerful that it prevents people from thinking critically. It prevents them from, in many cases, even acting in their own self-interest. An example of that to me is numerous folks who thought the COVID virus, was a hoax, and then either got very sick or died from it. their political affiliations or some other feelings over distrust in science, all that stuff, overrode, all their brains. So incredibly stupid people, incredibly stupid people. And I have my own stupidities. I don't put myself outside that group. So there are reasons why folks are so stupid. And I think humans are incredible at just so good at being willfully stupid. I mean, it's just amazing. And you really see this with group mentalities. I really see it most powerfully in group mentalities in politics, on both sides, the right and the left. But I've seen this at a smaller level among humans. I was working a project, a research and development project, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and the principal investigator was just full of shit. He lied about the capability of the project. He lied about the fundamental technologies behind the software and results. He lied about the results. And he was an incredible presenter, very charismatic. So he had flashy sales brochures. I was writing a lot of the software, and I didn't really feel like I could stand up. When I did stand up and complain to our manager and the upper levels of management, they tried to fire me, weren't able to fire me, but kicked me off the project. And I asked some of the other workers on that project under the same principal investigator who was full of shit. I said, do you guys actually believe any of this bullshit? And the response I got was, well, it's a paycheck. It's a fun job. We don't really care whether it's true or not. It doesn't really matter. We're making pretty good money. We like the work. He's nice to us. Fuck it, man. Like the don't shit where you eat. Was the advice they gave me. But that never really sat well with me. I don't like that. And so maybe there are some stubborn traits in some anti-natalists where they aren't necessarily going to go with the flow. They might buck the system. They might go the opposite direction. They aren't too worried to say, we're not going to put up with this. We're not going to put up with the bullshit, or we're going to call out. But calling out the emperor's new clothes is kind of a dangerous thing to do, and maybe it got our ancient forebears ostracized from groups and killed. So is that the evolutionary reason why humans can rationalize anything? I mean, I try to put myself in the position of a Nazi guard or somebody in World War II who was involved in the Jewish Holocaust. And it's real hard for me to go there and think, oh, what would I do in that situation? I like to think, oh yeah, I'd try to free the Jews, and I wouldn't accept any horrific orders from the Nazis, etc. But evidence sort of shows the contrary for people of that time, right? I mean, the culture is much more powerful than the human brain and the ability to reason. That takes a back seat to whatever it is, whatever the cultural norms are. Even if in retrospect you can say, holy shit, what a horrific society that was at that time. But at that time, oftentimes even, deep thinkers that go along with the program. And I guess you can make a lot of parallels in history to this. I think the period of American slavery in the United States is similar. Some of the folks knew it was wrong. Most people just went along with the program. And you had philosophers and psychologists and many others that tried to justify slavery. Say, well, it's okay for these types of reasons. And I find the reasons and justifications that folks gave for slavery back when that was prevalent in the United States are real similar to the reasons they give against anti-natalism. Like it's futile, it's a necessary evil, our society depends on it, et cetera, et cetera. But at some point, there were a few people in the United States that said, well, slavery is morally wrong and we ought to get rid of it. And then there were more and more of those people, and so they were able to eventually get rid of slavery. So I think the early anti-slavery folks were absolutely correct, but it wasn't an easy fight because they were in the minority, and I'm sure they got, you know, degraded or laughed out of a room. You know, in many cases, they were probably too scared to say anything too, and occasionally it was the slave holders who were anti-slavery, but they kind of shut up about it. I guess Thomas Jefferson might be an example of that. So you might ask, well, what does that have to do with anti-natalism? I think anti-natalism is in its sort of in its fledgling stage. It lurked for a long time. It isn't a recent development. It lurked for a long time, and there have been anti-natalists. You know, there's good anti-natalist references even in the Bible. Been anti-natalist for thousands of years. But perhaps it's gaining popularity, but I think it's still in the fledgling stage. So unfortunately, the question is, why are we anti-natalists? And that's the question because we're the vast minority. But I don't think the burden of proof lies on us anti-natalists to justify why we're anti-natalists. I think the burden of proof lies on every person who decides to bring another sentient creature into reality. So I think everyone who decides to have a child should have to answer the question, why are you natalist? Why are you doing this? What right do you have? How do you justify creating that child? But unfortunately, we aren't quite there. I wonder if in slave times, some people were asked, why are you anti-slavery? Like the people who were put on the spot had to answer, oh, we're anti-slavery because of this, 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 and this. You know, because the predominant view was slavery was okay. Well, now it's changed, right? At least in the United States. You know, somebody would have to say, you know, if someone was for slavery in our society, they'd be asked to justify that. Why are you for slavery? So the minority position tends to, by default, have to justify their position over the status quo. And I don't think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's just part of human nature. So humans are too stupid to understand a concept if it threatens their job. They're willfully stupid, so willfully ignorant they can't understand a concept if it threatens their job. Well, how about a question that, you know, just challenges their whole worldview, changes the way they look at movies, TV, pop culture. It could change the way they see themselves. It could change the way they see their family, their parents, their children. It's such a challenging concept that I don't think that that most natalists can even entertain it. They just say, "Oh, that's absurd." They walk away, so it's treated with derision or not even accepted. And this is some of what Benatar talked about his reception of some of his philosophical work, you know, earlier in his career. I thought about making a
comic book called Rationalizer Man, and Rationalizer Man would be the hero, and his superpower would be able to rationalize any act. So, for example, he needed to stop some robbers. He's not like Batman. Rationalizer Man just has a gun and he shoots all the robbers and he kills a few civilians too. But he can walk away and, oh my gosh, a normal superhero would be plagued by guilt. This would be an existential crisis. Am I fighting crime wrong? They'd go a certain arc. Maybe they'd change or change to a villain. But the Rationalizer Man would just say, oh, well, in order to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. And, we lost the civilians, but it was worth it because we got the bad guys. So Rationalizer Man will have this mental defense, allow him to rationalize his behavior. Just an incredible superpower. So then in one of the comic book episodes, the villains would say, oh, we're going to get Rationalizer Man this time. We found his secret identity and we're going to hold his family hostage. Well, Rationalizer Man doesn't give a shit. He just stays home and drinks beer all afternoon. They send some note saying, oh, we're going to kill your family, Rationalizer Man, unless you become our prisoner. And, he just doesn't care. Traces them back, kills some of the bad guys. They kill some of the hostages. Yeah, most of his family dies. And in order to do that, Rationalizer Man uses his incredible superpower. He says, I'm going to rationalize it. They were probably going to kill my family anyhow. Nothing I could have done really could have saved them. So, Rationalizer Man's just fine. And this was always such a funny concept to me, a concept of a Rationalizer Man, because that's humans too. So we already know our opinions. We just rationalize them. For most of us, we're going to do a certain things. We're going to do the things that we want to do, and then later we'll rationalize them. This is the interesting thing about the way folks search for philosophy. They read a bunch of philosophy and say, that philosopher's shit, and then finally they come up with a philosopher who, they really like. And this is great. They say, oh yeah, this philosopher has it, but they haven't really done much thinking. They haven't made a conscious decision. It's just this is the philosopher I resonate with. This way they're doing the philosophy works real well. So I think about Rationalizer Man's superpower as the superpower of the entire human race. I mean, how can you watch in Mendham's videos and Mendham's arguments and say, that's a crock of shit? How can you watch in Mendham, pretty articulate, and watch his anti-natalist arguments and just dismiss the whole thing? I mean, that's the power of rationalization. So the secret of Rationalizer Man is that all of us have that superhero ability. Even me? Yes, even you, Timmy. You can go on to become a serial killer or do the most horrific acts, and you'll always be able to rationalize it. How shitty could an act be that a human does? I mean, has there ever been the worst war criminal, the Pol Pot or Hitler or anybody who hasn't been able to say, oh yeah, well I did it for these good reasons? I mean, it's totally justified when you look at it like this. So what can't we justify? And now the vast majority of everybody justifies, because the vast majority is natalist. They justify bringing people into existence. And this, in some extent, is the perpetuating crime. Like, this is the thing that enables all the bad stuff to happen. If, for example, around Christ's time, shortly after Christ's time, 100, 200 AD, there were a couple of cults, religions, that were anti-natalist. And of course they died out, but what if they had been successful in converting the whole world and we had just stopped it back then? Well, I think that would have been a great thing. So you look back, we would never have had the Holocaust. We would never had the, a Black Plague in Europe. I mean, all the fighting and horrific, starvation and feudal system in China never would have occurred, at least the last 2,000 years after Christ. No bombing of the Twin Towers, no thalidomide babies, no AIDS, all the great wars. World War I and World War II wouldn't have existed. So wouldn't that have been great? But that didn't happen, and it doesn't appear to be happening now. And folks can rationalize it, right? I mean, you can, and especially with society's endorsement for natalism, you can have kids and say, well, it's the thing to do in society. One of my aunts wanted me to have kids, and my mom really wanted grandkids. So, oh yeah, and me and Jared had been together. Me and Molly had been together for 10 years now. So it's time we work together and create a few babies. Like just time, no real thought, and then post facto, after the kids are created, some of them die horrific, deaths. Oh well, that's just a risk, or that's God's plan, or we need to try for another one to make up for the one who died. And no end to the rationalizations. And if you ever talk to them about natalism or anti-natalism, their arguments against anti-natalism are going to be just offhand reactions, like lower brain function. So to me, it's just so interesting how people can rationalize anything. The natural state of a human, I think, is totally irrational, and humans are such a social animal that the social functions in the culture vastly override their individual thinking. So I don't think humans, power for individual thought is very good at all. And so what makes anti-natalists special? Do we have some power to see something or understand something that other folks don't? Yeah, perhaps that's the case. Do we just want to say to hell with the system? We buck the system. I'd say, yeah, that's probably somewhat the case. And some of us may say, well, we don't really want kids to begin with. That could help make an anti-natalist maybe a little bit faster if you just don't see the point. If you're less affected by societal or cultural norms. And I guess what would make an easier, so are there traits that people have that would make them more naturally accept some of the ideas and philosophy of anti-natalism? And I'd say, yeah, somewhat if they've had a worse life and they can understand that their life could be similar to the life of someone who they bring in. Like, as an analogy, you're less likely to invite friends to a shitty time in a swamp rather than to a nice time in an amusement park. So it looks like I got her tagged. Potentially. Though my life hasn't been too bad, and I've fumbled into the ideas of anti-natalism myself. And maybe if you're an atheist, it could be a little bit easier to become an anti-natalist because you don't believe any of that go forth and be fruitful and multiply bullshit, or whatever the equivalent is for other religions. I know the Bible a little bit. I don't know the Quran much, or any of the other religious books. But I think that commandment, the religious aspect of, you got to have children, it's your, godly duty, or some other crock of shit, you aren't held by that if you're an atheist. So I suppose if you're an atheist, that probably, you might be a little bit more predisposed to becoming an anti-natalist. Or if you're a vegan or somebody who was ever concerned about animal welfare, and you're worried about animals being hurt, bred against their will, this type of thing, you say, oh yeah, we can apply some of these thoughts to humans. I mean, for me, my transition into anti-natalism was around the start of the Me Too movement, where people were complaining about things done to them in Hollywood without their consent. And I thought, yeah, that's it's really bad to have a bunch of things done to you without your consent. And I think it's bad what was done to us without our consent. We were brought in without consent, and so that's a hashtag Me Too, but a little too complex for people to understand because their worldview depends upon not understanding it. So we got all these books and all this stuff written on antinatalism, and it's really a damn simple concept. Question whether it's good to bring people in. And is it okay that the majority of them seem to like it? The ones who can talk early on in their lives, the majority of them seem to like it. And my answer is hell no. It's not okay just because some of them seem to like it for some of the time. It doesn't justify the behavior.
I'm gonna center this thing. And keep her pretty much vertical. So
when the early American environmentalists started arguing that maybe we shouldn't be damming up all the rivers and ripping out all the forests, logging all the forests in the American West, these environmentalists weren't even laughed out of the room. It just more like stunned silence from the establishment. Like, what are the environmentalists even talking about? At that time, the prevailing understanding and idea is that all the forests, all the rivers, all the trees, all that is to be subdued for men, and that we've been given a mandate from God just to take it all. So I wonder what it was like for those early environmentalists trying to say, well, we're doing an enormous amount of destruction and we're depriving future generations from incredible natural wonders. They were the American government was about to dam the Grand Canyon. They had drawn up plans, and the environmentalists fought them. This was many years after the first American environmentalists existed, and finally won on that point. So I see this as some similar movement. How are you going to explain environmentalism to a logging company? Even the argument that it's going to be way bigger of a benefit for society long term, or even that revenue from tourism could exceed the money made from logging. It's not going to be a convincing argument. And this again goes back to the Upton Sinclair quote. It's hard to explain something to someone whose job depends on not understanding it. So Mendham says, I just need to get the silver bullet. I need to get the perfect argument, can't be argued with, it'll convince anybody. But I don't think it even matters. You could have such good arguments, and the other side is going to come up with shitty arguments. And they're going to get behind their shitty arguments, awful arguments, and just continue those awful arguments. So you can't convince these people, I don't think, with good arguments. Another example of this is like slaveholders. So if you were to write a list of arguments against slavery and go back to early 1800s America and talk to some plantation owners, they'd have a bunch of their arguments for slavery. And it doesn't matter how good your arguments were. Their way of life and their wealth and their culture required slavery, so they're not going to bend. It doesn't matter how good your argument is. And to me, similarly, this is so similar to talking to a breeder or somebody with children to try to explain antinatalism to them. It's not going to work. They've already decided they're natalist. They've already doubled down and invested in that position. They'll come up with arguments or rationalize it. It doesn't matter. There's nothing that can't, there's no shitty behavior that can't be rationalized. And there's no argument that's really going to be effective on these people. And unfortunately, this even plagues our economists. Like the bulk of economists think that Malthus was wrong. And Malthus was wrong. Malthus was, some type of economist or visionary who said, well, eventually there's not going to be enough farmland. So the population can only rise to a certain amount, and we aren't going to have enough farmland to support growing all the food for the whole world's population. And the only places where he was really wrong with that argument was a matter of dates or numbers of how much population we could support. The internal combustion engine and agricultural technologies allowed us to produce enormous amounts of food on small pieces of land. But the economists all think the only thing we can do is the only thing that will sustain our economy is constant growth, and this includes population growth. Well, we can't expand forever. We can't continue doubling in population. We can't continue growing our population. Eventually, we're going to run out of land. And Mars and Venus are pretty damn hostile places. And some economists or people who style themselves visionary think, oh, well, we're going to terraform Venus. Well, somebody should break the news with global warming. We're Venus forming Earth. We're causing greenhouse gases, just turning Earth a lot more closer to, what Venus is right now. Venus is a greenhouse planet. Much hotter than Mercury, even though Mercury's closer to the sun. So we aren't doing a very good job, and we aren't stewards. And this is another big part of the natalist argument against the argument of consent. They say, well, we don't have to worry about consent if you can't get consent. So this also goes to fuck the planet for the next generation. Really, we're not beholden to the next generation. We don't have to get their consent. We don't have to. It's just perfectly fine for us to fuck the planet for the next generation. No, I don't think so. I mean, you shouldn't do something bad with the idea that, oh, there's somebody they can't consent to it, and they're just going to inherit the shittiness. So I just think that's a terrible, terrible idea. If imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, then I'm definitely trying to flatter. Life Sucks with this video. I'm copying Life Sucks style of video making for the contest. Seen some of the videos where Life Sucks is tracing or drawing. It's just incredible. I could watch him work forever. So the backdrop of him doing some work on various videos is just incredible. And then this is also the bookend here is inspired by Life Sucks logo for the Exploring Anti-Natalism podcast. It's a snake eating its tail, which is an Ouroboros, which symbolizes the cycle of life and rebirth. And then the A through the Ouroboros through the snake represents how anti-natalism can break that cycle. This is loosely inspired. I don't have the same dimensions. I just sort of took the idea and ran with it from a blacksmithing perspective. I think Life Sucks work is absolutely outstanding. It's really impactful. And I thought about doing a door knocker or some other things, and then finally I thought, oh yeah, bookends are great because you can display them on a shelf also as a piece of art, and they keep your books up. So, and they don't take up that much room. These were not that difficult to make, though I certainly wouldn't say they were easy to make either. Took some time, took some planning. My approximate time to build one of these, and I actually built two for the contest. Time to build was about a full day a piece, around in the neighborhood of 10 hours. But you can see a lot of that time is spent setting up jigs and trying to figure out how to make them. So I think if I was to make another set, I might be able to make a full set of two bookends, possibly in a day. When you're metalworking, you can see I'm going through a lot of gas. I'm going through oxygen and acetylene on the torches. I'm going through propane gas to run the forge. And I think I have a CO2 argon mix as shielding gas on my welder. Some of these run out. I used a big abrasive chop saw to chop out the 1/4-inch solid stock to form the A of the anti-natalism, and I didn't show all that, so I cut it down to just what I thought were the interesting parts, and I didn't have my camera out the entire time. So I had to replace a grinder disc during this, a big grinder disc on my chop saw, and then of course I buy a couple extras so I don't get caught like that. And then I had to replace propane on my forge. I've had the forge for 6 years with the original tank of propane, which I think that tank was only half full when I got it. So you can tell I'm not an accomplished blacksmith. I'm not doing very much blacksmithing work. But this was an extremely fun project. I really enjoy doing a little bit of work outside the shop where I'm not under the gun to accomplish something for a client. You know, the hobby work is something I really enjoy, and I don't have much experience blacksmithing, but it was really fun. You can see for the blacksmithing, my anvil's a little 120-pound block of tool steel, and I don't have a horn on the anvil. So for the bending, I welded a couple of pieces of pipe to a big heavy metal workbench I've got. I'll leave those pieces of pipe welded on until I need to lay something flat on the workbench. Then I'll cut the pieces of pipe off and grind it flat. Just start over from scratch. But I really enjoyed making these. I hope you enjoyed my video. All credit goes to Life Sucks for influencing the video style, and also for inspiring me with his design for the broken Ouroboros anti-natalist symbol. Thanks all. Bye.